Can you imagine getting pregnant at 61 and being left alone, humiliated, as if you'd committed a crime? My name is Ethel Mae Johnson. I'm 74 years old, and to this day, I vividly remember that day when my life turned upside down. Telling this story isn't easy, not because I'm ashamed. On the contrary, now I'm proud of every scar, but because the words still burn my throat, as if the pain is waiting for a moment to break free. Back then, I lived in a quiet small town called Cedar Falls, Iowa, among snow-covered fields and silence that's only broken in winter when snow crunches under boots. My husband Robert and I had lived together for more than 35 years. He was quiet but honest, a man of habits. Every morning, black coffee, newspaper, radio in the kitchen. We were peacefully growing old together, or at least that's what I thought. It all started on a cold autumn morning, the kind of cold that cuts right through you, even when the furnace is still warm from the night. I'd been feeling strange for several days, too tired, nauseous. I was afraid I was getting sick. Seriously, sick. But it wasn't illness, it was life. When the doctor at our small clinic, smelling of antiseptic with peeling green walls, said I was pregnant, I laughed. I thought it was a cruel joke. 61 years old. It didn't make sense. But he looked at me seriously, repeated it, and then my world changed. The first person I told was Robert. It was already night. He lay there as usual, eyes closed, listening to the radio. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath, and said, "Robert, I'm pregnant." The radio kept crackling. He didn't open his eyes for too long, and when he did, there was no surprise. There was something worse. Contempt. "Have you lost your mind, Ethel?" he said, turning away. "Do you want people to laugh at me at my age? What will people say?" In that moment, I understood everything. I understood that the life I thought was secure was fragile. He didn't hug me, didn't ask how I felt. He only cared about the neighbors, gossip, what they'd say at the grocery store or at church. A week later, he left. Didn't look back. Said he couldn't handle it. As if I had chosen this myself. As if I was a mistake. He left me with a suitcase in hand and the sound of a slamming door. And then silence. Only the wind outside, the whistle of the kettle in the empty kitchen, and a heart pounding with fear. My belly was then just a rumor inside me, but it already filled my entire soul. And even despite the fear, despite the shame imposed on me, despite the weight of judgmental looks from neighbors, something inside whispered, "Hold on, Ethel, just hold on." And that's when the hardest but most beautiful part of this story began. I didn't leave the house for a long time. They say in small towns, rumors travel faster than the wind. And it's true. Within just a couple of days, I could hear neighbors whispering behind the fence. Some with contempt, some with snickers, some just out of curiosity. "Did you see Ethel? Can't be true at her age." I walked around the house in silence, pressing my hands to my belly that was barely there yet. It seemed to me that I could hear not only future life inside, but also my heart, broken but still capable of love. I tried to be strong, prepared simple meals for myself, potatoes, soup, oatmeal. I did laundry, cleaned, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, especially at night. At night the tears came. I cried not from pain, but from loneliness, from fear that I wouldn't cope, that the child would feel unwanted, that he was a disgrace, as his father had said. But there, were other sounds in this silence. The crackling of wood in the fireplace, the soft howl of wind outside the window, the rustle of my steps on the creaky floor. All of this seemed to remind me, you're alive, you're not alone. One day my neighbor, Martha Stevens, dropped by. She was around 70. She brought a warm apple pie and without saying a word, just sat beside me. We were silent for a long time, and then she said, "You know, Ethel, you're brave. I couldn't have done it." Those words were like a ray of sunlight through a winter window. Small but warm. I smiled for the first time in a long while. Maybe I really was brave. Not crazy, not ridiculous. Just a woman who decided to give life, despite everything. From that day, everything became a little easier. Not because people stopped talking, they kept talking, but because I started listening to myself, not them. And inside, I heard one thing. You can do this, Ethel. You've got this. The next day, I woke up very early, before dawn. Outside, the window hung thick fog, as if the whole world decided to hide from me. I quietly approached the window and watched as the first snowflakes slowly fell from the sky. Winter had come, like every year, but now everything was different. I stood barefoot on the cold floor, holding a cup of tea in my hands, feeling my fingers tremble from cold or fear. I could no longer tell the difference. Somewhere inside, Robert's voice still echoed. What will people say? This question sat in my head like a rusty nail. I remembered how in my youth I dreamed of a big house full of children. We had one son, Michael. He had moved to Chicago many years ago, rarely called. We barely communicated. I didn't know how to tell him I was pregnant again. I was afraid he'd turn away, think I'd completely lost my mind, but I had to tell him. I gathered my strength and called. The rings were long. I almost wanted to hang up when I heard his voice. Hello? Michael, it's Mom. Mom, is everything okay? I swallowed. I need to tell you something. It's not easy. He fell silent. I knew. He could sense the tension. Mom, what happened? I'm pregnant. There was silence. So complete I could hear the wire crackling in the phone. What did you say? Yes, I know it sounds strange, but it's true. I'm expecting a baby. Michael didn't say a word. Just hung up. I stood in the middle of the room with the phone in my hand, my heart beating so loud it felt like it would burst from my chest. He didn't believe it. He didn't want to believe it, and again, loneliness. I dropped to my knees right there on the kitchen floor and let the tears flow. I sobbed like a little girl, not because of judgment, but because my own child, my son, couldn't find even a drop of warmth to simply listen to me. But even through the tears, I felt that somewhere deep inside, behind the pain and disappointment, something new was beginning to grow. Small, stubborn, warm. Hope. Hope that the child I was carrying would accept me as I am, that he wouldn't ask why or what for, that he would simply hug me, and that would be enough. A few days later, I went to the county clinic again. I wrapped my scarf higher, covered my face. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to catch stares. At the reception desk sat a young girl, new. She looked up, saw my name on the card, and stopped for a moment. Ethel Mae Johnson, she asked with surprise. I nodded. You're pregnant, she whispered, as if it were something impossible. I didn't answer, just looked at her, directly, calmly. She looked away and handed me the appointment slip. At the appointment, the doctor, an elderly man I'd known for years, was calm and attentive. He examined me, checked the tests, and then said, "From a medical standpoint, this is rare, but not a miracle. This is life, Mrs. Johnson. And if you've decided to continue this pregnancy, we'll fight for you until the end." I didn't expect these words. I was afraid to hear impossible, dangerous, terminate. But I heard real support. And in that moment, something inside me seemed to fall into place. I understood. I'm not alone. There are those who believe that every life has the right to exist, regardless of age, neighbors' opinions, or fears from the past. On the way home, for the first time in a long while, I didn't look at the ground. I raised my eyes and saw how snow was settling on roofs, on tree branches, on benches by doorways. I felt it melting on my face with warm, almost living touch, and I was smiling. I was a grandmother with wrinkles, with gray hair, and baby booties in my bag. The next morning, I took out old notebooks, the ones where I used to write recipes and poems. I started recording everything I felt, every thought, every pain, every small joy. I wanted this child when he grew up to know he was wanted. He was loved from the very first day. I wrote in my diary, "You appeared when everything inside me had already settled down, when I thought my role in this life was over. But you're like a new chapter, maybe the last one, but so important. And from that day, I decided, no pity for myself or for life. I will live both for myself and for him. I will buy diapers. I will knit little socks. I will tell him stories like I once told Michael. I will teach him to drink tea with mint and cook potatoes in their skins. Let everything around say this is madness. I choose love because love is the only thing that doesn't age." Several weeks passed. My belly began to round out little by little, and with this came a strange, deep feeling of reality. I no longer just knew there was new life inside me. I could feel it. Sometimes when I sat in the armchair by the fireplace, covered with an old wool shawl, it seemed to me that someone inside was gently nudging me from within. At first I thought it was just fantasy, but one night I woke up and realized, no, it's him, my baby. He's letting me know he's alive, that he's here. I got up from bed and quietly went to the kitchen, wrapped myself in a robe, made chamomile tea, and sat by the window. Outside was deep night. The trees, heavy with snow, looked almost fairy tale-like, and the moon, round as a baby's palm, illuminated the snowdrifts with silver. In these moments I talked to him. "You probably don't understand anything yet," I whispered, placing my hands on my belly. "But I already love you. I'm waiting for you. Don't be afraid. We'll manage together." I started preparing baby things with my own hands, opened an old chest where I kept fabrics, threads, hooks. My fingers had something to do again. Each loop, each stitch filled me with peace. I knitted little mittens, then a hat, then a jumpsuit from blue yarn that I had once bought for a grandchild who never came. Now it became a symbol of my new beginning. But along with joy came fear. I wasn't young, and childbirth, that's risk. I read that there could be complications, that a C-section might be needed, that the baby could be born weak. I was scared, especially at night, especially when the house became too quiet and every sound seemed like a harbinger of trouble. I wrote a letter, a real one on paper with shaking lines, just in case something went wrong. I put it in the drawer by my bed. In the letter, I asked whoever found it to take care of the child. I named him Matthew, a name I'd always liked. Strong, kind, simple. But then I burned that letter, burned it, and watched the ashes swirl in the air because I realized I wasn't ready to give up. I would live, I would fight. And every evening, I wrote in my diary again, "You are my light at the end of a long road. I don't know how many years I have left, but I know that every day with you is a gift." Over time, the rumors got louder. I could hear even those who used to greet me warmly whispering behind my back. Some looked with pity, some with mockery, and some stopped greeting me altogether. At the grocery store, the young cashier with artificial shine on her nails looked at me like I was crazy. "At your age, people are taking care of grandchildren, not having them," she threw out once, not looking me in the eyes. I didn't answer. I just took my bread, salt, and eggs and left. My chest tightened, but not from shame, from exhaustion, from the fact that people always need someone to judge so they don't have to think about their own emptiness. At home, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at myself. Wrinkles, gray hair, slow movements. I saw a grandmother, but behind all this, I felt it. I was still a woman, still a person capable of loving, giving, caring, giving birth. Why does society decide when you can no longer do these things? Why should age be a death sentence? That day I remembered my mother. She died when I was 28, a quiet, strict, but fair woman. She probably wouldn't have believed it at first either, but then she would have hugged me. I felt this, and I missed her. In the evening, I heard a knock at the door again. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it and froze. On the threshold stood Michael, my son. He looked tired, haggard, but his eyes were different, warmer, softer. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry I didn't understand right away. I needed time. I couldn't believe it. I just stood and stared and then hugged him silently, tightly. He pressed his head to my shoulder like in childhood. For the first time in a long while, I felt I wasn't alone, that I had support, belated but real. "I don't know how to help you," he continued. "But if you've decided to keep this baby, I may. With you. I'll be here." Tears welled up again. But now these were tears of relief, joy, probably the brightest in recent months. That night I wrote in my diary again, "Today you got another protector. He's not perfect like all of us, but he's your brother, and he's waiting for you." After that evening when Michael returned, the house filled with different air. Not that warm, cozy air like in my youth. No, this air was cautious, but alive, as if two old trees decided to sprout new shoots again. He stayed for several days, cleaned the shed, brought firewood, even brought a couple of bags with baby things from the city, new diapers, a bottle, a jumpsuit with a bear. He awkwardly put them on the table and said, "I don't know if it'll work, but let it be." I smiled. This uncertainty in his voice was so familiar. He was my boy again, the same one who in childhood hid behind my skirt, afraid of thunderstorms. Spoke little, but in each silence there was more than in words. Sometimes he just sat nearby, looked into the fire, and I knitted. Sometimes we drank tea with blackcurrant jam and just breathed together. These evenings were like balm for the soul. I felt needed again, and yet I understood it was hard for him. He didn't know how to deal with this situation, didn't know how to tell his friends, his wife about it. Yes, he had a wife, childless. They had tried for a long time, but unsuccessfully. Maybe that's exactly why this news hurt him so much, as a reminder of what he didn't have and what would appear with his old mother. One day he said, "Mom, aren't you scared of childbirth, complications, that something could go wrong?" I looked at him and quietly answered, "I'm scared every day, but most of all, I'm afraid that this child won't feel wanted, that he's alone, and I won't let that happen." He nodded, and I saw something change in his eyes. He began to understand, not with his mind, but with his heart. On the 5th day, he left for Chicago. He stood at the threshold for a long time, not knowing how to say goodbye. "I'll come when labor starts," he said. "And if necessary, I'll arrange everything. Let him have my last name." I hugged him and felt my throat tighten with gratitude. This wasn't just help. This was an act of real love, without loud words, without conditions. That evening, the baby kicked especially hard. I put my hand on my belly and said, "See, you have a brother, and you're not alone." I started waking up more and more often in the middle of the night, sometimes from anxiety, sometimes from light movement inside, and sometimes just from the sound of silence. There's such special silence that you can only hear when no one in the house is breathing except you. In such moments, I would get up, go to the kitchen, make chamomile tea, and write. More and more often, I wrote specifically to him, to Matthew. His name wasn't in the documents yet, but for me it was already real. I addressed him as a living person. "Today I bought you a soft blanket. I don't know if you'll like the color. Green, like moss in the forest where your brother and I once picked mushrooms. Today I listened to the clocks strike midnight and imagined how you'll fall asleep to their quiet chime. Will you love fairy tales as much as I loved them in childhood?" Each such letter made me stronger, and strangely, I began to feel younger. Not in body. The body was heavy, my back ached, my legs swelled. But my soul was coming alive. Again, I started preparing the house, washed windows, sewed new curtains, threw out old cracked cups, as if making room not only for the baby, but for a new me. Even the room where I used to store unnecessary things now became a nursery. It smelled of paint, wood, and something new. Hope, probably. At the next appointment at the hospital, the doctor said, "Mrs. Johnson, you're holding up wonderfully. I'll be honest, many women half your age don't endure with such resilience." I smiled. I didn't feel like a hero. I simply didn't see another path. This wasn't heroism. This was love. On the way back, I walked down the snowy street. Snow crunched underfoot. The sky was gray but bright. People passed by. Some recognized me, some turned away. And I walked calmly because I knew everything I needed was already with me, inside me, under my heart. In the evening, I felt the little one start kicking especially actively. I lay on the bed, put my hands on my belly, and quietly said, "We'll meet soon, Matthew. Soon I'll be able to hug you, just a little more. Hold on, I'm with you." It was mid-March. Spring in our area comes slowly, reluctantly. Snow melts unwillingly with regret, as if it knows it will soon be forgotten. I felt something was wrong. Even in the morning, weakness, strange tension in my lower belly. My heart beat unevenly. I thought maybe I was tired, maybe I just didn't get enough sleep. But by evening I felt worse. I couldn't get out of bed. My whole body ached, and suddenly, like a flash, pain shot through me. Sharp, burning. I understood something was happening. I called an ambulance. My hands were shaking, my voice was quiet, but inside was panic. Not now, not early. At the hospital, they met me as a familiar patient. The doctor, that same elderly man, looked at me with concern. "We need to urgently conduct an examination. Possible threat of premature labor." I lay under an IV drip, listened to drops falling into the tube, and stared at the ceiling, white, cold, silent. Everything I had built, prepared for, could be cut short, simply disappear in one moment. And everything inside me clenched. I couldn't lose this child. I couldn't. The doctor came into the room in the evening, sat nearby, and said calmly but firmly, "Mrs. Johnson, there's risk. We can try to stop the process, but if everything continues, we'll have to do an emergency C-section. Today. Now." I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I prayed an unfamiliar prayer, not according to canon. I just whispered, "Please, Matthew, hold on. I'm here. I won't let you go." I signed the papers without flinching. In that moment, I felt not like an old woman, not like a grandmother. I felt like a mother, real, capable of giving everything just so the child would survive. Before they took me to the operating room, they gave me minutes of silence. I held in my hands those little knitted socks, the ones I had knitted first, and said, "You're strong, I know. You're not just a gift, you're meaning. You're my second spring, my hope." The light in the corridor was bright, nurses whispered, and I walked thinking, even if this path ends today, I don't regret it. I chose love. I chose life. I remember only light, bright, cutting the eyes, blinding. It was everywhere, in the ceiling, in the lamps, in people's faces, and then silence. Some kind of deep womb-like, almost cosmic silence. And in this silence, I understood. Everything happened. Everything went well, I heard through sleep. "He's breathing. Everything's fine." At first, I didn't believe it. I was afraid to believe, afraid it was a dream, that now everything would disappear. But then I felt someone touch my hand, gently, carefully, as if checking whether I was alive. "Mrs. Johnson, congratulations. You have a boy, 2 pounds, 14 ounces, weak but strong, a real fighter." I closed my eyes and cried. These weren't just tears. This was a flood. Pain, fear, tension, loneliness, everything flowed out of me with these tears. I had lived so many years, but no moment had been as real as this one. I gave birth at 61. I was a mother. They showed me Matthew a few hours later, small, wrinkled, with reddish skin and a chubby little nose. He was sleeping. I looked at him like at a miracle, not at a baby, at an entire universe compressed into this tiny body. I couldn't take my eyes away. My lips whispered, "Are you here? Are you really here? You're mine." I remembered everything. Robert's words, the silence after the call to Michael, contemptuous looks at the store, nighttime fears, drops on the cold kitchen floor. And none of this mattered anymore. None of it. Because here he was, the person for whom I went through everything. They moved me to a private room. I lay next to him. He breathed quietly like spring wind and sometimes clenched his fists as if fighting even in sleep. I pressed him to me and repeated, "I won't let you down. You didn't make a mistake choosing me. I'll live for you." The next morning they brought me documents. Michael had already arranged everything. Matthew's last name was his. He called. His voice was hoarse from tears. "Mom, you did the impossible. I'm proud of you," I cried again. But now from gratitude. I didn't know how many days we would be given. Didn't know how everything would work out later. But I knew one thing for sure. This boy was my salvation, my truce, my second life. Matthew and I were discharged after 10 days. It was a sunny but cold morning. The air was transparent as glass, the sky blue as if washed. I held him in my arms, wrapped in a blanket, and felt how he breathed heavily through his little nose. He was still weak, almost weightless like a shadow, but alive. Alive. Michael came for us himself. Without words, he took the bags, helped me into the car. He looked at Matthew and said, "Hello, little one." I looked at him and saw that there were no more doubts in his eyes. There was something else. Care, tenderness, acceptance. He didn't speak loud words, but I saw he had accepted this child as family. At home it was very difficult. My body got tired faster than I expected. My hands shook, my back hurt. I fell asleep, sitting up. And Matthew? He cried often, piercingly. His lungs were stronger than I thought. The first nights I barely slept. Just tea, wet towels on my forehead, and prayers. "Hold on, son. Just a little, we'll manage." Neighbor Martha brought soup. Michael stopped by after work, sometimes stayed overnight, but otherwise everything was on me, and I didn't complain. I knew this was mine, my mission, my miracle. Sometimes, when Matthew slept, I sat by his crib and looked at his face. He resembled me, nose, eyes, wrinkles on his forehead, and Robert, who was no longer nearby. Strangely, I no longer felt anger toward him, only regret. He missed out. He didn't wait. He didn't believe, and that was his loss. I started writing long, warm letters to Matthew again, as if talking to him in advance. If you're ever sad, know that you are light in my darkest winter. If they tell you something is impossible, don't believe them. I'm living proof of that. Every day was a test, but also a gift. When he first smiled in his sleep, I cried. When he grabbed my finger, I laughed through tears. When his breathing became steady, I fell asleep as if peace itself was beside me. I understood that years are just numbers, that the heart doesn't know age. And motherhood isn't a matter for the young, it's a matter for the loving. A month passed, then a second. Time flowed differently, not by calendar, but by the rhythm of Matthew's breathing, by his crying, by rare minutes of silence. I began to feel how days intertwined, how night turned into morning without pauses. But in this endless circle, I found happiness, simple, quiet. Matthew began to hold his head up, then to smile, with a real, wide, toothless smile that made my knees buckle every time. He recognized me, recognized my voice, my hands, my face, and every time he looked at me, I felt that he understood. I was his home. I sang him old American lullabies, the ones my mother sang to me. Rock-a-bye baby in the treetop, and every time he closed his eyes to these words, I felt I was passing on something more than just a melody. I was passing on roots, memory, the love of generations. Physically, it was hard for me. Sometimes so much that I was afraid I'd fall holding him. My muscles ached. My vision was getting worse. I went to see the doctor. He examined me and said, "You need more rest. You're not made of iron." I smiled. "I'm a mother. and that's stronger than steel. I began to get used to my new body. Slow, careful, but still capable. I learned to do everything slowly but well. Bathe Matthew carefully, supporting his back. Change diapers unhurriedly while whispering something tender. Every movement became a ritual, every task a meditation. There were days when Michael came. He held his son with visible uncertainty but with growing love. "He's real," he said once. "I still can't believe this is our Matthew." I watched my grown son learn to be a brother and thought, here it is, life. Not according to plan, not according to rules, but real, full. One evening, I wrote in my diary, "I thought I gave you life, but maybe you gave it to me because before you I lived like a memory, and now like a feeling." Matthew became meaning, my anchor, my spring, my future. One morning there was a knock at the door. I thought it was Michael or maybe Martha with pies. But when I opened it, two people stood on the threshold. A woman in a coat with a notepad and a man with an ID. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson. We're from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous complaint." I felt cold run down my spine. "What complaint?" "A complaint was filed that the child is in unsafe conditions. Allegedly due to your advanced age, you're alone and can't provide necessary care." I froze. They entered the house, examined rooms, wrote something in the notepad. The woman looked into the nursery, touched the mattress, examined the medicine cabinet. I watched her every movement like a wolf watches a stranger near her den. "You keep things clean. Everything's neat," she said finally. "But age is a risk factor. You're 61. This is an atypical situation. We'll need to conduct an investigation of conditions, possibly assign supervision." They left, and I stood by the door with Matthew in my arms. He was sleeping peacefully, suspecting nothing. But a storm raged in my chest. Who wrote it? Neighbors? Maybe that same cashier, or just envy. I didn't know. I didn't. But I knew one thing. No one, no paper, no age, no stranger's opinion would take my son away from me. I called Michael, told him everything. He was silent for a long time, then said, "We won't let them hurt you. If necessary, I'll get a lawyer. Let them try to prove you're a bad mother. It's ridiculous." He came the next day, brought documents, certificates, everything that could confirm our readiness. "Mom," he said, "I'm with you till the end." I felt like I was in battle again, but now I wasn't alone, and this fight was different. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I collected documents, made lists, talked with officials, wrote explanations. I fought like a mother. The strength in me was different, calm, deep. One night, after another inspector's visit, I sat by Matthew's crib and watched him sleep. Let them think I'm old. Let them write that I'm not like everyone else. But I'm yours and you're mine. Nothing else matters. I wrote in my diary, being a mother isn't about age. It's about readiness to give everything, even when you have almost nothing left. And I have a soul left, and it's yours. A week passed, then another. I lived in constant expectation. It seemed every doorbell, every phone ring could turn into disaster. But I showed no fear, not to Michael, not to neighbors, and especially not to Matthew. He felt my every emotion, and I wouldn't let him feel anxiety. One day they knocked again. It was them, the same woman with the notepad and the serious-faced man. But this time, there was something different in their eyes. Not suspicion, but cautious respect. We sat at the table. I, as always, in a wool cardigan, a crocheted doily under the teacup. Matthew slept nearby in his bassinet. The woman looked at him, then at me. "Mrs. Johnson," she began quietly. "We studied the materials, talked with doctors, with the local, police, even with your neighbors." I was silent, looking into her eyes. "And you know, we don't often encounter such cases, but what you've done, it commands respect. Yes, the age is non-standard. Yes, it's difficult, but you're a real mother." I was still silent. My heart beat like a drum. "We're closing the investigation. No violations found. Matthew stays with you, officially, legally. We'll even add recommendations about your responsibility and stable condition to the conclusion. Michael arranged everything perfectly." I felt as if someone had taken a heavy coat off me. I exhaled, didn't cry, just nodded. "Thank you. He's my whole life." When they left, I took Matthew in my arms and pressed him to my chest. "You're home, son, and no one will separate us." I called Michael. "Everything's fine, everything's good." He didn't say anything unnecessary, just whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mom." That evening, I didn't write in my diary. I just sat by the window, watched the setting sun paint the snow pink, held my son in my embrace, and breathed evenly, deeply, like a person who survived a storm and suddenly understood all of this wasn't in vain. None of those documents, inspections, words matter. Only one thing is important: how you hold a child, how he looks at you, how his tiny hand grips your finger. That's truth. Everything else is noise. Life after everything we went through became like a quiet river. No storms, no waves, but with depth you can only feel with your heart. Every day with Matthew was filled with small things that seemed miraculous. How he yawned, frowning. How his crib creaked when he turned over. How his cheeks reddened in the frost after short walks. Matthew and I became like one whole. He was my continuation. My hands knew when he needed to be fed. My hearing caught the slightest changes in his breathing. My heart told me when he simply wanted me to pick him up and hold him close. I prepared simple dishes, buckwheat with milk, carrot puree, apple compote. The house smelled of warmth, smelled of home. Matthew grew, got stronger. He already confidently held his head, laughed, recognized faces, and I lived, didn't exist, didn't drag out time, but truly lived. Sometimes in the evenings I turned on the old radio and hummed along with songs from the 60s. Matthew listened, eyes wide open, as if understanding everything. He especially loved my favorite, Blue Moon. I held him in my arms and whispered, "See, little one, now you're in." This moon too. Sometimes neighbors dropped by. Martha, as always, with pies. Betty from down the street brought homemade jam. They no longer looked at me like I was a crazy woman. Now there was genuine warmth in their eyes. "Ethel, honey, you're a real hero," Martha would say. "And that little boy is such a beauty. You've inspired us all." I just smiled. I didn't need recognition. One look from Matthew was enough for me. His little palms reaching for my face, his voice when he cooed in the mornings. I knew everything that came before was just preparation, and real life was beginning now. One day I sat down to write in my diary, but stopped. I couldn't find the words. Not because there weren't any. On the contrary, there were too many, but each seemed insufficient. And then I simply wrote one thing: thank you. Thank you, life. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for giving me a chance to start over. And most importantly, thank you, Matthew, for coming, for choosing me. Spring flowed into summer as if it didn't notice itself. Sunlight peeked through the windows. The grass outside became thicker, and Matthew grew day by day, imperceptibly, like grass after rain. His eyes became clearer, his gaze more conscious. He already reached for toys, rolled onto his tummy, made funny sounds as if he wanted to tell me something important, and I listened to his every sound, every breath, because I knew time is fragile, there's little of it, and every moment with him was like a gulp of air in a deep well. One morning, I stood by the window with a cup of tea. Matthew was sleeping in his crib, and the house was filled with silence, not frightening but peaceful. I looked at the yard, at the green trees, and suddenly it hit me. I had stolen this time from fate. I wasn't supposed to be a mother at this age, not according to rules, not according to statistics, not according to people's opinions. But here I am, here we are. And there was something almost sacred in this. I remembered how often I heard in my youth, "Time is running out. Hurry up, you're too late. This is a mistake." And now I understood. The mistake isn't age. The mistake is missing love. I didn't know how much time I had left, a year, 10, 5. But now it didn't matter. What mattered was that every day was filled with meaning, not rushing, not fussing, but real. Peaceful, full. Michael came more often, sometimes with his wife Sarah. They held Matthew, played with him, fed him. I watched this and felt how my family had become alive again. After so many years of silence, misunderstanding, distance, we were together again. United by the one no one expected, and he had become the center of our world. Matthew began making sounds that resembled Ma. I knew these weren't words yet, not conscious address, but still my heart squeezed with happiness every time I heard. Ma, ma, ma. I sat in the kitchen, held him in my arms and thought, if I could stop time, I'd leave us exactly in this minute. Just like this, together, quiet, happy. I wrote in my diary, "If you ever read this, Matthew, know that you were a miracle. You appeared when all doors were closed, and you opened them with your cry, your smile, your existence." And that night, I fell asleep peacefully, without worries, without thoughts, only with a child's breathing nearby, steady, confident, strong, like everything we had endured. Today, Matthew turned 1 year old, 1 whole year. I hold in my hands his first drawing, crooked lines, paint stains, little fingers stained with yellow and blue. He doesn't know what he's doing, but I do. He's drawing my life, new, bright, bold. We sat on the bench in front of the house. The sun was warm. The wind carried the scents of lilacs and fresh grass. Matthew was on my lap, giggling when I blew on his neck. His laughter was like a song, like a prayer, like an answer to all the questions I had asked myself during those long nights. A year had passed and I was still alive, and he was alive. We were a family. I had become different, not weaker, but wiser. I learned not to fear age, opinions, numbers. I learned not to wait for someone to understand. I learned to simply live in each day, in each breath. People asked me, "Don't you regret it?" No, not for a day, not for a minute. I don't just not regret it. I'm grateful. because this child gave me not only meaning, but healing. He's my chance to live not the remainder, but a new chapter. I don't know if I'll be here when he goes to first grade, or when he falls in love, or when he becomes a man. But I know one thing. There will be a piece of me in him, of my heart, my strength, my faith, that it's never too late for anything. All I want him to remember is that his mother fought, loved, and chose him when the whole world said no. I closed the diary, put a period, not as an ending but as a beginning, because everything most important is just starting. Not for me, but for him, and I'll be here as long as I'm given. Thank you for listening to my story. If you feel like everything is lost, don't believe it. While you're alive, everything is possible. While there's love in you, you can work miracles. With all my love, Ethel Mae Johnson.